Last month, the New York Times editorial board was widely criticized, you might even say shamed, for writing this. Americans are losing hold of a fundamental right as citizens of a free country, the right to speak their minds and voice their opinions in public without fear of being shamed or shunned. There is, of course, no such fundamental right. The Constitution grants you the right to say whatever you want, but it does not grant you any control at all over other people's reactions to what you say, and there is no constitutional guarantee that you're going to feel good about what you say after you've said it. This week, in her debut essay as an opinion columnist for the New York Times titled, "What's Shame Got to Do with It?" Tressie McMillan Cottom says that shame can, quote, be functionally good, like when it keeps your pants on in public, despite the bad rap that shame gets in our overly psychoanalyzed culture. It is merely a feedback loop that tells you something about your behavior as well as the expectations of others. It is bizarre to think that we should legislate, regulate, or condition away an emotion. The New York Times editorial board last month considered it a grave social problem that 55% of people in a poll, quote, said that they had held their tongue over the past year because they were concerned about retaliation or harsh criticism. The Times had no idea what word that came to those tongues was being held by those people. How many of them were choosing not to say the N-word? How many of them were choosing not to say that thing about Jews because they weren't quite sure if the person they were talking to might be Jewish? Tressie McMillan Cottom points to a 1964 New York Times poll that showed, quote, 54% of white New Yorkers said the civil rights movement was going too fast. The real problem in the 1960s was that not enough people felt any shame at all. Alabama's Governor George Wallace felt absolutely no shame when he tried to block Vivian Malone and James Hood from registering as the first black students in the history of the University of Alabama. And now, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, who feels no shame about anything, complains that Democrats, quote, tried to shame her for supporting the January 6th insurrection. The New York Times editorial board need not worry about Marjorie Taylor Greene's burden of shame, since she is so obviously incapable of feeling any shame for anything at any time. Joining us now, it is my pleasure to introduce Tressie McMillan Cottom, Associate Professor at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and the newest opinion columnist for the New York Times. Thank you very much for joining us tonight with this discussion of your debut column, which I was just delighted by, word for word, going through it. And one very important distinction you make early in the piece, which I'd love you to discuss now, is this distinction you make between shame and stigma, and how sometimes people who think they're talking about shame are actually talking about stigma, and then there are other people who don't even recognize the existence or the function of stigma.
Absolutely. And thank you so much, Lawrence, not only for reading it, but for really pulling out the pieces that really mattered the most to me when I was thinking about where we are in the public discourse and what I think is missing. If I give people the benefit of the doubt, and I really always try to do so, at least with readers, not always with politicians, but certainly with my readers, I think we were missing the language to talk about what we really wanted to talk about. And so this issue of shame being conflated with stigma was one of the things that mattered most to me. And there are two good reasons for that. One is that when we talk about being shamed or feeling ashamed in the way we talk about it these days, it's too easy to weaponize the idea when it covers every negative feeling that people have. It also obscures the fact that sometimes shame makes you do the right thing. And in public life, our primary concern has to be doing the right thing, not necessarily how doing the right thing will always make you feel. Stigma, now, on the other hand, now, stigma is what I think a lot of well-meaning people are trying to describe. And stigma is something that people do to you that says there's something about you that is inferior or unworthy of participating in public life. What's interesting to me is the way shame has become a political wedge to say that anything that makes you feel ashamed and upsets you because you feel ashamed has stigmatized you. And one of the ways that we're doing that is by doubling down on the stigmatization of other people, trans kids, women, people of color, immigrants, right, who are actually stigmatized, meaning their lives are impacted because other people see them as inferior. That is not the same thing as shame. And arguably, stigma is the public problem we should be concerned with.
You approach this as a sociologist and as a brilliant and entertaining writer that you really opened my eyes to perspectives on this that I did not have. But this point in the poll, in the Times poll that they're so concerned about, that 55% of people are holding their tongues, I have to tell you, in my personal experience, that's a great thing. I mean, I grew up in Boston, in white Boston, where the language was extremely racist in over 90% of the people. And I watched them over time gradually hold their tongues more and more and more. Yeah. And in the holding of the tongue, they actually learned things and improved slightly, at least marginally, their view that wouldn't have happened if they weren't shamed into holding their tongues.
Imagine that, learning something because we're listening instead of speaking. I know, right? I saw that finding and I thought, well, first of all, I think 55% is too low. Yeah. I would hope the number would be higher. I would hope that more people were thinking about how they would be perceived by others before they speak. The reason why that feels so oppressive to some people and why it angers so many people, and let's put a finer point on it, it particularly angers white men, right? There's a reason why they are angry about having to hold their tongue. And that is because for a very long time, just by virtue of who they are in this country, other people have had to hold their tongues around them, right? So spreading around the burden of being more thoughtful about what you say about other people is fundamentally a good thing. It is not that more people feel like they have to hold their tongue. It is that there are more people having to hold their tongue who used to did not have to hold it. That is called social progress. That is called democracy. Right? Democracy isn't just all of us being treated equally and having equal opportunity. Democracy is about us sharing the burden of the responsibility for other people's participation in public life. That is actually a good thing sociologically, and I would argue democratically.